record up. Thank you.
Is that coming through now, Randy?
It is.
Right. Okay. I don't know if there's anyone here who was not here last evening, but I'm going to review some of the themes that I covered for you so we refresh ourselves. And for those who may not have been here, then you'll get an idea of what spiritual democracy is about. So one of the central myths in the United States is what I've called spiritual democracy. There's a picture of my book. This is a wampum belt of the great law of peace, the treaty that was signed by the Iroquois elders to bring peace to the 6 warring nations. Here in the center is the white pine tree, symbolic of the peace, the sacred white pine tree. The notion of the founding of American democracy as the basis for advancing a new world spirit coincides with the early writings of Benjamin Franklin, who was a deist and a Freemason. Franklin's many discussions with Native American nations during the many treaty councils he attended and published from his own printing press in Philadelphia prior to the American Revolution led to the establishment of a government based not on the declaration of war, but on the great law of peace. Here's a portrait of the signing of a document between a Native American tribe and the founding fathers. There's Benjamin Franklin. And one of the things that he, as a deist, believed in was religious relativism. And no national God images are present in the writing of the US Constitution, save one. And this one God, uniting many gods of many nations into the New World God, is the transnational notion that Thomas Jefferson preserved from discussions with the founding fathers in the making of the Declaration. They referred to it simply as nature's God. And there's the signing there of the Declaration. This idea of the unity of the human races is expressed most clearly in the founding fathers' term, e pluribus unum, out of the many, the one. There's one of our early coins with the e pluribus unum in our Liberty Bell. And here we have a picture of the great father of American geology, Alexander von Humboldt, who, as I said last night, Ralph Waldo Emerson was reading in 1844 in the original German, and that Walt Whitman had on his writing desk when he was penning the draft of Leaves of Grass. So in Cosmos, Humboldt provided a remarkable new view of nature as the unity within diversity, a concord of all human races, all languages, all nations, and all families of the earth, plant as well as animal, in an effervescent variety of a single species, life itself, vouchsafed with equal enjoyments and pleasures on a planet itself a living entity spinning in space. Ascending in his sketch of the phenomenon of organization from the simplest cell, the first manifestation of life, progressively to higher structures, he created a portrait so vast as to stagger the mind with a completely new vision of diversity, a presentiment of the order and harmony pervading the whole universe. This is from chapter 1 of my book called Cosmos. It's a wonderful picture of him. Here's another one. Now, an interesting coincidence is that Humboldt called this sense of unity or oneness the feeling of the infinite in his book Cosmos. And Jung called the experience of cosmic unity the feeling for the intimate. So you see how closely their definitions come here to defining what spiritual democracy is when experienced at this level of oneness. Here's a picture of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was Walt Whitman's mentor and who greeted him at the beginning of a great career, as he said. His dates there. This is the original copy of Longfellow's Song of Hiawatha, which influenced Jung, as I mentioned last night, in the writing of Symbols of Transformation. Now, a debt of gratitude was introduced into the US Congress in 1987, with a debt of thanks was finally repaid to the Iroquois Confederacy and other Indian nations by the Republic of the United States. So I was very glad to see that. And it was Resolution 76. Several historians have noted that in addition to Franklin, the founding fathers, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams, all integrated notions of the great law of peace into US policies. Much later, these ideas were carried forward into the passage of Resolution 76, introduced into the US Congress in 1987 with a debt of thanks to, as I said, the Iroquois and other nations by the Republic on the occasion of the 200th anniversary of the signing of the US Constitution. This event was preceded by a 1977 presentation of a document called Basic Call to Consciousness by a Seneca elder, John Mohawk, to the United Nations conference in Geneva, Switzerland, Jung's home base. Here's a picture of Jung's house in Kusnacht. It was built in 1909, the same year Jung met William James, and the family moved in that year. Now, as I mentioned, Jung wrote a very important epistle to the United Nations UNESCO Foundation. And the Iroquois Treaty of Peace was at the foundation not only of the writing of the Constitution, but also one of the central principles of UNESCO. Jung was likely unaware of the role the Iroquois played in the development of his own spiritual attitude, since he first encountered Hiawatha in the Miss Miller fantasies, the American woman, who he amplified the visions of in Symbols of Transformation. So what are some psychological variables? Well, in 1948, Jung outlined to UNESCO his specific thoughts and recommendations on what is required to avert wars in an essay titled Techniques of Attitude Change Conducive to World Peace. To the question, what religion is the most universal? Walt Whitman answered, all are equals. These are the three basic strata of democracy Whitman defined for us in his 1871 prose essay, Democratic Vistas. The first was the political stratum, the second, the material stratum, and three, the religious or spiritual stratum. So there are three basic strata in Whitman's understanding of democracy. And he stood for the religious or spiritual stratum, but also encompassed the material and political, of course, and I would say the metaphysical. So what Whitman gave birth to is the religious stratum or spiritual democracy. This is a copy of Carl Jung's Volume 5, Symbols of Transformation, where he amplified the visions of Miss Miller and went through a long exegesis of the Song of Hiawatha to amplify her visions. So in 1925, when Jung gave a seminar, he said that symbols of transformation seem to forecast the future. So a picture of a couple of Taos drums that I brought back from New Mexico, and there's a drawing, painting actually, of acrylic painting of the king snake I mentioned last night as a totem animal that I use in drumming. Two kinds of thinking. In the first chapter of Symbols of Transformation, Jung said that there are two types of thinking. One is mythopoetic, and the other is linear or directed thinking. So directed and non-directed thinking. In our experiential, I'm going to encourage all of you to try and let go of the directed thinking and engage in non-directed thinking, or what William James called automatic writing. This is a photograph of Louis Agassiz. William James traveled with Agassiz to South America, to Brazil, to collect fish specimens for the Harvard scientific lab. And he was a student of Alexander von Humboldt, and he had a profound impact on James. Apparently they slept in the same hammock together in Brazil. So The Varieties of Religious Experience was the first transnational text on spiritual democracy. These are James's dates here. It was published in 1902. Here's a copy of a book that I read, which I love, Essays in Radical Empiricism. And this is the type of thinking James was engaged in when he met Jung, radical empiricism, which you could say is at the basis of Jung's psychology of individuation. So what is radical empiricism? Well, it consists first of a postulate. The only things debatable among philosophers are things definable from experience, he said. B, there's a statement of fact. Relations between things, conjunctive and disjunctive relations, are matters of direct particular experience. And three, generalized conclusion, that he arrived at a conclusion based on experience. Directly apprehended universe needs no trans-empirical connective support. I've created a little diagram here to give you an idea of the ways in which William James had a profound effect on Carl Jung. He introduced Jung to the notion of psychic objectivity, to how to arrive at a detached vista when viewing phenomena, or data, as Jung would say, facts, empirical facts. Three, his unlimited vision. James was credited by Jung as having led him to see the infinite extent of the human psyche. Four, equality, the idea that we are all equal. And this was also a notion in Cosmos that Humboldt wrote about as a scientist. Five, the idea, the notion of a higher destiny, that we have a higher destiny we need to tap into. And that comes through direct religious experience. Six, the relational metamorphosis, that change, transformation happens through relationships. And what this led to is seven, spiritual independence from Freud. I think that James really helped Jung arrive at an appreciation for his profoundly religious nature. And he did not get that mirrored in his relationship with Freud, as you know, but he certainly did from James. And I think this was a very important friendship. Now, James talked about there being a breathing self at the center of experience. And he also talked about in an essay called The Energies of Men, how sometimes we get into a second wind. You've heard the concept of the second wind. Well, sometimes James said a third or a fourth wind can supervene. And James loved to hike in the Adirondacks in the mountains, and was quite an avid mountain climber. So he would get into physical states of altered consciousness to get into transpersonal states of awareness. Now, the empirical self encompasses four basic models for James. Four dimensions of being, and there are two subsets. This is in my book on William James and Jung. One is the material self, which consists of also the body self and the breathing self. Two is the social self. Three, a spiritual self. And there's a central nuclear self that he spoke of, which I mentioned last evening. This would be the active self in us, the vocational core of our essence. And then for the transcendental thinker or the metaphysical self, and this was a postulate that can only be inferred, according to James, not proven to exist empirically, although that's questionable whether or not we really can't find empirical evidence. I think we can through dreams and through visionary experiences. Now, it's very interesting that when Jung rewrote his theory of the collective unconscious, he spoke about the psychoid continuum, which is below the collective unconscious, or say above too, beyond the collective unconscious. And this also contains matter and the entire cosmic universe. He spoke of the spectrums of the psychoid continuum by using the light spectrum with the infrared being the most instinctive pole, and the ultraviolet being the most spiritual pole. And interestingly, James has this same model in the varieties of religious experience that Jung was reading when he redefined his theory of the collective unconscious. So I think there's a definite influence there. Now, here are a couple of diagrams I've given you here to take a look at with the four basic selves. And then they're broken down now in individual models with the breathing self at the center, the body self and the material self. And here's this world soul at the periphery or circumference, the world, you could say. The world field, as Erich Neumann postulated, Jung's follower Erich Neumann, he spoke of a world field. There's a social self there that reaches out to the world through our relationships and our professional group, family and friends, and of course our work, our vocation. So this is the spiritual self with the breathing self, you could say, also as part of what is around us, because prana in Hindu philosophy is also a cosmic experience, that it's not just, of course, in us, but in trees. And the breathing self, Randy was talking about the gray whales in the bay. Of course, they're breathing in that prana, that breath of life that is in all nature, plants as well. So the spiritual self has a central nucleus. This is what I call the nuclear. Well, actually, Heinz Kohut, I think he took his idea from William James. He talked about the nuclear self as well, which consists of ambitions and ideals, and it's constellated in early childhood between approximately 4 and 7. But I've developed the idea of a nuclear symbol in my master's thesis research on vocational dreams. So I think vocation is central to that level of the self. And here's the metaphysical self, which consists of the transcendental thinker and the absolute. James never tired of arguing with philosophers about the absolute. And this is a model that I have in my book on William James and Jung, with the 4 selves, and in the center is the 0-point field where science and religion meet in samprajnata, which is the state of samadhi or spiritual experience, enlightenment. And this is the passage I read to you last night about democracy being on trial, a very famous passage by James. Democracy is on trial, and no one knows how it will stand the ordeal. If democracy is to be saved, it must catch the higher, healthier tone. Now, in his preface to the varieties of religious experience, there's a very wonderful letter that James, that the editor quoted from James. The problem I have set myself is a hard one. First, to defend experience against philosophy as being the real backbone of the world's religious life. And second, to make the hearer or reader believe what I myself invincibly do believe, that although all the special manifestations of religions may have been absurd, I mean its creeds and its theories, yet the life of it as a whole is mankind's most important function. So there you see the religious function of the psyche. Jung really got this idea from James. Some European Jungians don't really know that, and I think it's important to point it out. He also talked about evoking our private destiny. Religious experience evokes our individual or private destiny. It rehabilitates the feeling element in religion and subordinates its intellectual parts. It leads to the fact that the conscious person is continuous with a wider self through which saving experiences come. And the pragmatic way of taking religion is the deeper way, because it gives the body as well as the soul some characteristic realm of fact as its very own. Well, in Psychological Types, published in 1921, Jung has a 21-page chapter on William James, the type problem in modern philosophy. And he talks about the characteristic pairs of opposites in James's types, and then formulates a general criticism of James's typology. This is the book that I mentioned. It was published in 2020 by Analytical Psychology Press. And spiritual democracy is a way to sacred action, whether through political activism, through advocacy for the environment, speaking up in community or in science, art, music, or the writing of poetry or prose, and so many other channels. This is a copy, the copy of my book on Walt Whitman, my first book on Whitman, Shamanism, Spiritual Democracy, and the World's Soul. Now, we looked at this last night. It's a picture of Herman Melville and the sperm whale. My brother Richard shot that photo off the Azores, as I mentioned. And I showed this case study last night of a boy who saw the movie Moby Dick and with Gregory Peck and had recurrent nightmares. So he played it out. And there's Captain Ahab with his ivory leg standing on a ship with the white whale being harpooned by. Now, one of the things that is central to my book is this idea of vocalism that Walt Whitman talked about, which is the divine power to speak words. The quality of a right voice needs to be developed, Whitman asserted, grown or evolved. Vocalism was the method by which he said such advancement could occur in the human body, soul, and spirit through the vocal center. What lies slumbering and ready for use in our speech patterns is the quality of the right voice. All waits for the right voice, Whitman said. Thus, vocalism was simply called by him the divine power to speak words. Of course, this is what Jung was doing in his Red Book, giving birth. So Walt Whitman is widely known as the father of American poetry. He's was a radical abolitionist, a sexual liberator, a poet of the common people and democracy. And he has a remarkably positive perception of a strong, creative global religion, which he called spiritual democracy. Many today probably share his criticisms of conventional religion and are seeking positive alternatives. Whitman's shamanistic vision is an experiential contrast to the world's major religions. This contribution is important because it anticipates modernity. Whitman viewed his visions of democracy as equal to, not greater than, anybody else's, since equality for him forms the basis of the religious democracy that he has faith in and hopes will help to develop the spirituality of the future. Whitman's visions of spiritual democracy, therefore, include all religions. One of the ways he accomplished this was through the access to the shamanistic level of the psyche, the shamanic structures of consciousness, which Jung talked about as well, which are deeply archaic and thus deep in the collective soul and powerful. This is a copy of the 1860 edition of Leaves of Grass, which Whitman referred to as the New Bible. This is the 150th anniversary facsimile edition. So in Chance Democratic, in that volume, Whitman talks about vocalism, and it intersects with Jung's method of active imagination. On the very first page of the New Bible, Whitman spoke of the art of vocalizing all. This was Whitman's calling to evoke an awareness of the all in his listeners in order to help magnify human consciousness and spur readers into sacred activity of the cosmos. In Chance Democratic, he announced, to oratists, to male or female, vocalism, breath, measure, concentration, determination, the divine power to speak words. Are you eligible? Are you full-lunged and limber-lipped from long trial, from vigorous practice, from physique? Oh, now I see arise orators fit for inland America, and I see that power is folded in a great vocalism. The miracle of pregnancy and birth was reflected in Whitman's views on religious democracy. Spiritual democracy existed as an equality with everything that is. The ability of the human soul to realize herself is dependent upon self-betterment. To birth or to give birth to the god or goddess within. Whitman was very imperative, even emphatic. Birth giving was to him urgent. We must give birth to new ideas, images, symbols, earth words, before it is too late. Now, in his poem To the Sayers of Earth Words, Whitman suggested that birthing the self was and continues to be a sacred obligation within each person. Speaking, talking out loud, vocalizing, assumed a place of honor co-equal with active visioning. This was key, for he asked, will you rot your own fruit in yourself there? Will you squat and stifle there? So birth giving was not just something that women do. It is also something that all of us can do. And Jung showed that in his dialogue with Isdubar in the Red Book, where he became a mother of God and gave birth in that poem that he wrote in the chapter on Isdubar, who was the figure of Gilgamesh, the Mesopotamian hero figure. Becoming complete in oneself, Whitman was confronting each reader with what is essentially a psychological problem. For we each have a divine child within us, as Jung taught, a seed or a fruit of futurity. Whitman said, I swear the earth shall surely be complete to him or her who shall be complete. The question was, will the fruit be stillborn, or will the reader find a vehicle, a vocation, a calling to make it truly living? The idea of birth giving was also central to Jung's psychology of individuation. Whitman's primary calling was to sacred activism, and it was mythopoetic. This is the passage I read last night from Whitman. God abdicates. I say to you that all forms of religion, without excepting one, any age, any land, are but mediums, temporary yet necessary, fitted to the lower mass ranges of perception of the race, part of the infant school, and that the developed soul passes through one or all of them to the clear homogeneous atmosphere above them. There all meet, previous distinctions are lost. Jew meets Hindu, and Persian Greek, and Asiatic, and European, and American are joined, and any one religion is just as good as another. By this time, spiritual democracy had emerged in the works of the greatest 19th century poets, Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, and Herman Melville. Melville's Moby Dick, I've broken up the key elements in the story to 5. One is the separation and disseverance from nature and the animal world, represented by the great whale. 2, shifting from top-down patriarchal myths of domination. 3, religious movement away from fundamentalism. And 4, illumination of the inevitable darkness in humanity, the dark side of God and evil, the need for dictatorships to fall. Poets who've used the method of vocalism have helped to articulate what our national poet, Emily Dickinson, modeled for us in her very unique method of short lines and without punctuation, and her characteristic dashes. At the apex of the Civil War, Dickinson wrote, God of the manacle as of the free, take not my liberty away from me. Being unchained and sharing equality with all people in the land of liberty was Dickinson's way to claim her name, America. She signed her name that way in several letters. For herself, as the forerunner of a new international myth, she saw that liberty had been compromised by slavery and emancipation, paved the way for women's liberation. It's a picture of my book on Emily Dickinson, published in 2018 by Fisher King Press. And here is a picture of the front door of Carl Jung's home with the wonderful Latin inscription, vocatus aquae non vocatus Deus aderit, called or not called, God will be present. So I mentioned Liber Novus and Jung's colloquy in the Red Book with the figure Isdubar, and in the dialogue, Jung's I identifies with one being a mother of God. I am the mother, the simple maiden, who gave birth and did not know how. My God, I love you as a mother loves the unborn whom she carries in her heart. Laying in a maternity bed as a pregnant mother was a theme that we found in Whitman. We find it in Meister Eckhart as well. And also in Jung. Since I am a giver of birth, whence do you delight me, O God? So here are 4 basic postulates for you of spiritual democracy. Jung's effort to put forth a new scientific myth of the self in 4 basic postulates. 1, the new religious attitude expresses itself collectively through the transformation of human relations. 2, the way is symbolic, all paths point the way to the self as what he called the way of what is to come. 3, God is experienced as an internal image, and those that worship God in the new image will worship him as a supreme meaning. 4, we all have to be crucified symbolically on the cross of our destinies if we are to survive as a species. And here are 7 principles of spiritual democracy that I've outlined as well. 1, individual religious experience comes above life in any creed or religious community. 2, to be a proponent of a new religion is obsolete in a psychological age. 3, when a person succeeds in stopping to project the self onto a creed, state, or community, the self lives in one and will no longer be external or separate or different from one. 4, no one creed possesses the absolute truth above other religions. 5, all images of divinity can be found in the collective foundation of the world soul. 3, the self rules the whole of the psyche. All God images of the world's revealed religions must change, as every living religion must change with the times. And 7, Jung prefers the term self, as James did as well, because he is talking to Hindus as well as Christians, and he does not want to divide, but to unite religions. Most importantly, the self is inclusive of good and evil. Democracy is a psychological institution. True democracy, Jung wrote, is a highly psychological institution which takes account of human nature as it is and makes allowances for the necessity of conflict within its own national borders. Spiritual democracy is, in Jung's psychological view, a matter of the heart. If the heart doesn't change, nothing changes. And then finally, I have the 10 ways to practice spiritual democracy that are in the appendix to my book. 1, follow your conscience. Conscience was originally argued by James Madison as a principle that he felt should be in the Constitution, but the founding fathers left it out. Carl Jung brought it back in. Follow your conscience. He wrote a paper, a psychological view of conscience in 1957. 2, immerse yourself in nature, or nature's God, if you prefer. 3, practice vocalism and active imagination. 4, watch your dreams. 5, practice tolerance. 6, be mindful of judgments and beware of projections. Consider a change in cultural attitudes. Our San Francisco analyst, Joseph L. Henderson, postulated that there were 5 basic attitudes: the aesthetic, the philosophical, the social, the religious, and finally the psychological subsumes the other 4 attitudes. 9, speak up, introduce others to spiritual democracy. So I just wanted to review this for all of you so we can get started this afternoon. Spiritual democracy, as I've said, is a uniquely American idea. According to Whitman, as I've noted, spiritual democracy exists in 3 stages, not 5. And it's an ideal of peace, not war. Spiritual democracy, I feel, is an antidote to Trumpism. Spiritual democracy is not a religion of the religious right. In fact, I wouldn't even call it a religion. Walt Whitman did, but I think it's more of a psychological attitude. So that concludes my PowerPoint, and I want to come back now.